For 20 years, Maria Rodriguez set the dinner table for 4 people every single night, even though only 2 remained. Her daughter's bedroom stayed frozen in time, posters on the wall, soccer cleats by the door, guitar leaning against the bed, because when your child vanishes into thin air, hope doesn't follow logic. But in March 2024, a phone call would shatter that hope in the worst way possible and answer a question that had haunted an entire nation. I've covered true crime for years, but this one keeps me up at night. Not because a 12-year-old girl disappeared from one of America's most visited national parks, though that's terrifying enough. What haunts me is knowing that while thousands searched desperately for Emma Rodriguez, the man responsible was standing right there among them, wearing a uniform, carrying a radio, looking concerned. He answered investigators' questions, helped coordinate search efforts, and went home every single night knowing exactly where she was. The Grand Canyon disappearance of Emma Rodriguez in July 2004 became the kind of mystery that destroys everyone it touches. FBI agents carried her photo in their case files for 2 decades. Park rangers rewrote entire security protocols. And Maria Rodriguez? She built a foundation that found 17 missing children. 17 families got their miracles. But not hers. Her daughter's case went cold. The leads dried up, the media moved on. Until 20 years later, when a broken man named Derek Matthews walked into an FBI office and said 4 words, "I need to confess." What you're about to hear isn't just about a missing child found. It's about how guilt can torture someone for 2 decades. It's about how evil hides in plain sight. And it's about one family's refusal to let the world forget their daughter's name. This is the story of what really happened to Emma Rodriguez and why the truth took 20 years to surface. July 14th, 2004. I've stared at that date so many times, it's burned into my brain. Emma Rodriguez was 12 years old, bright-eyed, camera around her neck, completely in love with the Grand Canyon's beauty. Her family, Maria, Carlos, and her 8-year-old brother Miguel, had saved for 2 years for this vacation. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. The kind of memory that shapes a childhood. Instead, it became the day their entire world collapsed in the space of 30 minutes. Here's what gets me about this Grand Canyon disappearance. It happened in broad daylight, surrounded by thousands of people. Emma wasn't some reckless kid who wandered off alone. She was responsible, cautious, always stayed close to her parents. At 2:28 p.m., she asked her mom if she could use the restroom at the visitor center. Maria said yes, watched her walk inside, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then, 10. By minute 15, Maria's stomach was already twisting. She sent Carlos to check. He came back alone, face white as paper. Emma hadn't come out. The panic that followed was immediate and absolute. Park rangers mobilized within minutes. Security locked down exits. Helicopters circled overhead. Search dogs tracked every trail while hundreds of volunteers combed the desert terrain for days. They checked every overlook, every hidden crevice, every dangerous drop-off where a child might have fallen. But here's the thing that made investigators' blood run cold. They found nothing. No clothing, no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle. This missing woman case defied every logical explanation. How does a child vanish from one of the most monitored locations in America? Later, much later, witnesses would report seeing a girl matching Emma's description near the employee parking area around 2:35 p.m. But in the chaos of those first hours, nobody connected those dots. The assumption was that she'd gotten lost in the park, maybe fallen, maybe gotten disoriented. Nobody wanted to say the word abduction out loud, because acknowledging that possibility meant accepting that a predator had operated in their midst, right under everyone's noses. It meant accepting that somewhere in that crowd of concerned faces and official uniforms, someone knew exactly what happened and was saying nothing. The Rodriguez family's life shattered in ways most people can't comprehend. Carlos quit his engineering job immediately, dedicating every waking hour to finding his daughter. Maria started calling hospitals, morgues, police stations in 5 different states. Miguel, just 8 years old, watched his parents transform into strangers, consumed by grief and desperation. And as the sun set that first night without Emma, as the temperature dropped and the search teams returned with nothing, the family tragedy truly began. Because not knowing is sometimes worse than the worst truth. And they were about to not know for 20 years. The FBI didn't waste a second. Within 4 hours of Emma's disappearance, they had a full task force assembled: special agents, behavioral analysts, forensic teams converging on the Grand Canyon like a military operation. Lead investigator Agent Sarah Chen interviewed over 300 people in the first 72 hours alone. Park employees, tourists, vendors, anyone who'd been anywhere near that visitor center got questioned hard. And here's what drove them crazy. Everyone saw something, but nobody saw anything useful. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where all the pieces looked identical. The security footage became their obsession. They pulled every camera in the park: entrance gates, gift shops, parking lots, trailheads. Frame by frame, they tracked Emma's movements. There she is, walking with her family at 2:15 p.m., pointing at the canyon views. There she is at 2:28 p.m., entering the visitor center restroom. And then, nothing. She walks in, but she never walks out. Not through the main entrance, not through any exit. The only explanation that made sense was the employee corridor, a restricted hallway connecting to staff areas and leading to the back parking lot. A hallway with convenient camera blind spots. They brought in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, even psychics that desperate families sometimes turn to when logic fails. The canyon itself became a suspect. Maybe she'd fallen, gotten disoriented, wandered into dangerous terrain. Search teams rappelled down cliff sides and explored caves. But Emma wasn't there. This wasn't an accident. The more they searched the natural landscape, the clearer it became. Someone had taken her. Someone who knew the park intimately. Someone who understood exactly how to disappear with a child in plain sight. The suspect list grew and shrank like an accordion. A registered offender camping nearby, cleared with an airtight alibi. A maintenance worker with a concerning background passed his polygraph. Even tourists with prior arrests got scrutinized. Agent Chen told me years later that the frustrating part wasn't lacking suspects. It was that their best suspect had been right there, interviewed twice, and hadn't raised a single red flag. Professional, concerned, helpful. Everything a guilty person shouldn't be. That's the terrifying thing about some predators. They don't look nervous because they genuinely believe they're smarter than everyone else. By month 3, the investigation hit walls everywhere. Tips flooded in. Emma spotted in Nevada, seen in Mexico, living with a cult in Arizona. Every lead evaporated under scrutiny. The Grand Canyon mystery became a textbook case in frustration. They knew someone had taken her. Knew it had to be someone with access and knowledge, but proving it without evidence was impossible. The case stayed officially open, but resources got redirected. And the Rodriguez family? They were left with nothing but questions, grief, and a determination to never stop searching. They had no idea that the person responsible had fooled everyone, and would continue fooling them for 2 more decades. 20 years. Let that sink in. 20 years of Maria setting an extra place at dinner. 20 years of Carlos driving to police stations with new theories, new desperate hope. 20 years of Miguel growing up as the kid whose sister disappeared, carrying survivors' guilt that no child should bear. This wasn't just a cold case. It was a family trapped in suspended animation, unable to grieve properly because there was no body, unable to move forward because there were no answers. The case resurfaced periodically in true crime circles, especially on anniversaries. In 2010, investigators used advanced 3D modeling technology to reconstruct the crime scene digitally. In 2015, they re-interviewed every park employee from that day, hoping time had loosened someone's memory or conscience. DNA technology improved dramatically, but without physical evidence to test, it was useless. This unresolved mystery became a case study taught in FBI training: how someone can commit what appears to be a perfect crime if they're careful enough, knowledgeable enough, and cold-blooded enough to stay silent. What people don't realize is how Emma's disappearance changed the Grand Canyon itself. Security protocols got completely overhauled. More cameras, stricter background checks, expanded family safety programs. But for the rangers and staff who'd been there in 2004, it left permanent scars. Several employees quit within months, unable to handle the guilt. Others became hypervigilant to the point of paranoia. The park carried this invisible weight, this dark storytelling element that tourists didn't know about but locals felt every single day. Parents held their kids' hands a little tighter. Rangers watched crowds a little more carefully. Emma's ghost haunted that place. The true crime community kept her story alive online. Forums, podcasts, documentary proposals. Amateur investigators developed theories ranging from plausible to insane. Some of this helped keep pressure on authorities. But a lot caused additional pain for the Rodriguez family, who had to watch strangers debate their daughter's final moments. Like it was entertainment. That's the brutal reality. True crime keeps cases alive, but it also turns family tragedy into content for people eating popcorn on their couches. By 2020, most people had accepted this case would never be solved. Carlos died of a heart attack in 2018, never knowing what happened to his daughter. Miguel was a grown man with kids of his own now, learned to live with the empty space his sister left behind. Maria kept going, exhausted but never surrendering. Her foundation had helped locate 17 other missing children. 17 miracles. Just not hers. And then, in March 2024, a call came from the FBI. A former park employee had walked into their Phoenix office. He was crying, shaking, and he wanted to confess everything. Derek Matthews looked like a man who'd been dying slowly for 20 years, 47 years old, divorced twice, struggling with alcoholism, hands trembling as he sat across from FBI agents. "I'm tired," he said. "I'm so tired of carrying this." They thought he might be another false confessor at first. Happens all the time in high-profile cases. But within 10 minutes, Derek provided details that had never been released publicly. Details only the person responsible could know. The room temperature seemed to drop. Derek had been a maintenance supervisor at the Grand Canyon in 2004. 27 years old, 3 years on the job, knew every corridor, every blind spot, every camera angle. When agents showed him Emma's photo, he broke completely. "I see her face every time I close my eyes," he sobbed. "I hear her asking me for help." He explained his painkiller addiction back then, his impaired judgment, his catastrophic moral failure. Forensic psychologists call it opportunity-based predatory behavior. Not a serial offender, but someone who saw a chance and took it in a moment of pure evil. The confession was methodical and devastating. Derek described noticing Emma near the restrooms, how she'd looked momentarily lost. He'd been wearing his maintenance uniform, carrying a radio, looking official and trustworthy. He told her there was a family emergency, that her parents needed her right away, that he'd take her through the employee area to save time. Emma, being a good kid taught to respect authority, followed without resistance. That's the heartbreaking reality of child abduction cases. Predators exploit the very lessons we teach kids about trusting adults. Derek led her through the restricted corridor, out to the employee parking lot, into his truck parked perfectly in a camera-blind spot. What happened next gets darker, and I need to be careful here because this is about honoring Emma, not sensationalizing her death. Derek claimed he panicked almost immediately after leaving the park. He drove for hours into the Arizona desert, to a remote area he'd scouted during hunting trips. Emma was terrified, crying, begging to go home. She tried to escape once. And in that moment, Derek's words get murky here, whether from genuine remorse or self-preservation, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that Emma Rodriguez died that night in the desert, alone and afraid, at the hands of a man she'd trusted because he wore a uniform. The investigators processing this confession had never seen anything like it. Derek provided a hand-drawn map showing exactly where he'd buried Emma, described the blanket he'd wrapped her in, mentioned a silver bracelet she'd been wearing that had never been publicly disclosed. He waived his right to an attorney, seemed almost eager to purge this secret after 2 decades. The lead prosecutor called it a textbook guilty conscience confession, not prompted by new evidence, but by complete psychological breakdown. Derek had developed severe PTSD, depression, substance abuse. His life had fallen apart piece by piece until prison seemed preferable to the haunting cold cases replaying in his mind every night. Guilt, it turns out, can be a life sentence all its own. The recovery operation in April 2024 felt surreal. 20 years in the Arizona desert, extreme heat, flash floods, wildlife seemed like too long for remains to survive. But Derek's map was obsessively precise, like he'd visited the site mentally 1,000 times. They brought forensic anthropologists, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and a full excavation team to Bureau of Land Management property 90 miles northeast of the Grand Canyon, the kind of place where you could disappear forever if nobody knew where to look. 3 days into the dig, they found her. I won't give graphic details out of respect, but the forensic evidence confirmed everything Derek confessed. Emma's remains were wrapped in a deteriorated camping blanket, exactly as described. They recovered that silver bracelet, a quinceañera gift from her grandmother. Dental records provided positive identification within 48 hours. After 2 decades of hoping and praying, the Rodriguez family finally had their answer. Not the miracle they dreamed of, but closure. They could bring Emma home. That's something thousands of families with missing loved ones never get. The forensic analysis revealed something prosecutors jumped on immediately: inconsistencies between Derek's accident during a struggle story and the physical evidence. The positioning of remains, fracture patterns, evidence of trauma, it all suggested something more violent and intentional than Derek admitted. This is common in confessions, where perpetrators minimize their culpability, reframe murder as an accident. The truth is probably darker than what Derek said, and that's something Emma's family has to live with. Sometimes knowing creates more questions than answers. What destroyed me researching this was learning about the life Emma never got to live. She'd wanted to be a veterinarian, loved animals more than anything. Her journals, kept by Maria all these years, were filled with drawings of dogs and cats, plans for college and travel, and making a difference. She was a straight-A student, played soccer, just started learning guitar. All that potential, all that bright future, stolen by one man's evil choice. And for what? Derek's psychological evaluation suggested no clear motive, no long-term planning, no rational explanation beyond opportunity meeting broken impulse control. Sometimes there's no satisfying answer to why. Here's what made my blood run cold. During the 2004 investigation, Derek had been interviewed twice. He'd passed both times without raising suspicion. He'd even participated in early search efforts, helping coordinate maintenance staff to check restricted areas. He'd looked investigators in the eye, expressed concern for Emma's safety, and returned to work like nothing happened. That level of compartmentalization, that ability to function normally while hiding such horror, speaks to either severe psychological dissociation or sociopathic tendencies. The psychiatrists evaluating him couldn't agree on which, but they all agreed Derek Matthews had been a ticking time bomb of guilt that finally exploded after 20 years. Maria Rodriguez was 73 when she got the call. She told me something I'll never forget. I prayed for 20 years to find my daughter. I didn't know the answer would hurt this much. There's this assumption that closure brings peace, that knowing is always better than not knowing. But the reality is more complicated. Yes, Maria could finally bury her daughter. Yes, she finally had answers. But those answers came with images and details no mother should carry. The grief suspended in hope for 2 decades came crashing down all at once, fresh and raw, as if Emma had just disappeared yesterday. Miguel processed it differently. 32 now, father to a 6-year-old daughter he'd named Emma in honor of the sister he barely remembered. He told reporters part of him had always known she was gone, that holding on to hope felt like lying to himself. The confession gave him permission to finally grieve properly, to stop living in limbo. But it also brought survivor's guilt crashing back. Why her and not him? Why did he get to grow up while Emma stayed frozen at 12 years old forever? The memorial service drew hundreds of people, families of other missing children, cold case advocates, investigators who'd worked Emma's case over the years, even strangers who'd followed the story. They released 12 white doves, one for each year of Emma's life. Schools planted a memorial garden. The Grand Canyon held a private ceremony, finally acknowledging the tragedy on their watch. It was beautiful and devastating, this collective mourning for a child frozen in time while the world moved on. But the aftermath wasn't just sadness, it was rage and desperate need for justice. Maria attended every court hearing, sitting front row, making Derek look at her, making him see the destruction he'd caused. Miguel's victim impact statement had hardened prosecutors crying. He talked about growing up as the brother of the missing girl, about his father dying without answers, about his daughter asking why she's named after an aunt she'll never meet. The Rodriguez family didn't want Derek's remorse. They wanted him to feel every day of the 20 years they'd suffered. Derek was sentenced to life without parole, plus additional years for kidnapping and concealment. But the sentencing wasn't about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, about a court declaring that Emma mattered, that her life had value, that what happened was unforgivable. During his final statement, Derek apologized directly to Maria. She stared at him in silence, then stood and walked out. Sometimes the most powerful response to evil is refusing to give it any more of your energy. Emma's case was solved, her body was home, her killer locked away. But the impact on her family, That's a wound that will never heal, a missing piece that can never be replaced. Emma Rodriguez was 12 when her life was stolen, but her story didn't end in that desert. It lived on in her mother's tireless advocacy, in the 17 children her foundation brought home, in the security changes that have probably saved countless lives at national parks. Behind every statistic about missing children, there's a family whose world shattered, a community that never forgot, and a victim who deserved so much more. Emma wanted to be a veterinarian. She played soccer. She was learning guitar. She had dreams that should have unfolded beautifully. Here's what haunts me most. Cases like Emma's are still happening. Right now, families are setting tables for people who aren't coming home, searching for answers that seem impossible to find. The hard truth is that predators constantly evolve their methods, finding new ways to exploit trust and opportunity. They study our blind spots, our routines, our assumptions about safety. Emma disappeared from a crowded national park because Derek looked official and acted calm. That should terrify us into being smarter, more vigilant, more willing to have uncomfortable conversations about child safety. So let me ask you, what would you do if you saw a uniformed employee leading a distressed child through a restricted area? Would you question it or assume it was legitimate? That hesitation, that assumption, that's what predators count on. If this story affected you, subscribe to Missing Innocence and turn on notifications. We're not telling these stories for shock value. We're honoring victims, supporting families, and spreading awareness that could save lives. Share this with parents, teachers, anyone who works with children. Start real conversations about safety, and if you know anything about any missing person case, speak up. Derek waited 20 years, and Emma's family lost decades they can never get back. Emma's case is closed, but her legacy lives on in every child we protect, every conversation we have, every moment of awareness that keeps innocence from going missing. What case should we cover next? Let me know below.